Hello, welcome to Bookstr Diversity. I'm here with Bridgett M. Davis, the author of the book, The World According to Fannie Davis, and it is a memoir of her mother's life in the Detroit numbers. I had the great pleasure of writing a cover story about Bridgett for Kirkus Reviews, which has been just a sheer pleasure to learn more about Fannie Davis and about Bridgett, who is a screenwriter, a professor, who has written multiple novels, two novels. And The World According to Fannie Davis is her first nonfiction book.
Yes.
And it just came out this week.
It did. Yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yes.
It was pub date.
Pub date.
And
Yes.
that's amazing. So how has it been so far?
So far, so good. It's
Excellent.
exciting. Yeah. I had my first event in Philadelphia last night. That was wonderful.
Amazing.
I was at a library, the free library there. I love libraries.
Yes.
Yes. So it was a great way to kick it off.
Oh, amazing, amazing. You're speaking to a trained librarian, so I'd love to hear that you were at a library and that you had a great time. Tell me what inspired you to write this memoir about your mother.
In some ways, I feel as though I was planning to write it my whole life, but I had to build up my nerve and get the courage.
Okay.
And the one incident that really prompted me to get started on this project was that my son, who was literally like 10 years old at the time, saw a picture of my mom. It was just on the dresser, and he looked at it and he said to me, "Mom, what was she like?" And my heart went boom, 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 because I answered him. I said, "Oh, she was amazing," but in my mind I was thinking, I have kept this secret about my mother so well that I've kept it from my own children.
Right.
I've kept who she was from my own children, and that can't be. They need to know who their grandmother was. And that really was the thing that finally pushed me to start the process.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Speaking of secrets, you kept her business a secret, basically,
I did. Yes.
for as a kid.
Forever.
Forever,
Yes.
right. And
Yes.
so what was it like for you to have to keep that secret as a kid? Well, let's back up before we talk about that. Why don't we talk about what the numbers?
What the secret was.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. What are the numbers,
Right.
and what was Fannie Davis's relationship with
And
the
so
numbers?
my mom was a numbers runner. And more specifically, she was a banker for the numbers, which meant that she was running this underground lottery business. So before there was a legal lottery, there were the numbers. You could play a 3-digit number, and you could play it with someone like my mom. Any number you wanted, 529, sure. And the really amazing thing about that is, if you were her customer and you played that number and it came out, it was the winning number, she would pay you for that. And so it was
cash.
It was an all cash business, and it had a great sort of return. For $1, you could win 500. So it's 500 to 1 odds. Now it's very hard to get the right 3 digits, but it was still really an alluring business for many people in the Black community. We didn't think of it as gambling.
Right.
We just didn't. People called it playing the numbers.
Yeah.
But it wasn't really a game. At least for my mother, it was a business. For folks who thought, hey, I love these odds, the same reason people play lottery today, that's why people play the numbers. Because they thought, you never know. Hey, you never know.
Hey, you never know.
That's right. So they would do it. She had so many customers that the volume of people playing with her enabled her to create a middle-class life for herself and for us. So, yeah, it was pretty incredible. But it was, by the way, illegal. Yeah.
So this would have been in what era in Detroit?
So she launched the business in 1958.
Oh, wow.
And she ran that business for 34 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, and went through a lot of different iterations, but it was essentially the same underground, informal lottery business. So throughout my childhood, the 60s and 70s, she was actively running the business.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I love what you write in the book about her being the quintessential American.
Yes.
And that's not usually, unfortunately, a phrase that's affiliated with self-employed or entrepreneurial Black women. So I think it's just a wonderful kind of reframing of the Black matriarchal
Yeah.
figure in literature. So I wondered if you could talk about to that aspect of her life, both as
Yeah.
you experienced her as her daughter, but also just in general as a journalist.
Right, because really, you're right. I was of two minds as I was writing the book. Obviously, I was writing it as her daughter, but also, really, yes, as a journalist, really looking in for the first time in my life more objectively and realizing that she was really a striking figure in history.
Yes.
That's how I came to understand her, you know. She was one of the only women in Detroit to actually bank the numbers.
Wow.
So one of two. So she was rare in that way. But also, I understood very clearly, even growing up, that my mom was all about believing in the American dream, and more importantly, believing in her right to that pursuit of happiness, right? And so in her mind, this is what you did. You made a way out of no way, and then you also sort of move forward with this rugged sense, this sense of rugged individualism,
Right.
which is a quintessentially American concept, if you think about it.
Yes.
And I remember her, she used to talk about Joe Kennedy, the Kennedy father, you know, John F. Kennedy's dad.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's true, but it's rumored that he made his fortune by starting out as a bootlegger,
Wow.
and that he then sort of moved into legitimate business and essentially worked to ensure that his sons were part of American politics. And no one thinks about him as anything but this patriarch who deserves admiration. And yet, perhaps, he had this particular kind of beginning. And does it matter? Because, you know, Prohibition went away and alcohol is legal now. And you can say the same thing about my mother's business. All those years that it was illegal, it wasn't illegal because it wasn't legitimate. There were just laws in place for very particular reasons so that people couldn't do it openly. But look what happened. Almost every state in this country now has a legal lottery. So it begs the question, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Who's legitimized?
Who's
and who isn't?
legitimized and who isn't? And
Absolutely.
why?
And yes, and why?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
I could talk to you for hours about this. Is
Yeah.
I find it also fascinating. I remember the detail about Denmark Vesey using money from
Yeah.
the lottery to like buy his freedom.
Most people
right?
don't know that fact. I didn't know it either until I started doing the research. And I was like, wow.
It's incredible.
It's an incredible part, yet again, of American history. You know, the 13 colonies all had lotteries. This is part of the way they were legal. This is how they helped to finance their capital improvements. Before we had like a stock market and, you know, bonds that could do that kind of thing, the 13 colonies used their funds from lotteries to do that. So they were very much legal. And then along comes Denmark Vesey in 1799, and he wins a lottery and uses those proceeds to pay for his freedom.
Wow.
To buy his freedom.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was interesting, right?
Yeah.
And he, of course, went on to lead a revolt, a slave revolt, you know, and became this incredibly important figure in American history. But the legal lotteries were soon no more.
Right.
States, one after another, decided that they were no longer going to be legal. They were going to outlaw them. And there is some belief, I'm one of these people who believes it, that, you know, the idea that African Americans could actually equally have a chance at winning and getting some financial like stability was probably not what the founding fathers had in mind. And so I think that that prompted these policies to change. It was a little bit too egalitarian, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
also, I mean, part of the book that is less, I think, dazzling and endearing as the parts that are about your mom are the parts where you talk about lynching as a result of Black people becoming sort of self-sufficient economically, and sort of this legacy of home ownership and kind of the risks that were involved pretty much no matter what, whether you did something legally or illegally.
Yeah, I mean, there's this guy who's quoted in the book that I quote in the book a scholar who basically said if you really want to look at the confiscation, how do you say that, confiscation?
Yes.
Of property that blacks owned, taken by whites, just taken, land grabs, then you should follow the lynching trail. Mm-hmm. Because people don't make that connection.
Right.
There's a very direct connection between African Americans being lynched and the desire to take property away from them. Mm. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So alarming.
It's alarming.
Speaking of journalism, though, I mean, there's so much rich reporting that, you know, I've said to you, and I think you also, I was reading your Lit Hub piece today, and in the excerpt there, you talk about Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns because mm-hmm. of just sort of the foundation for the migration of African Americans into Detroit. And other parts of the country as the way that they started to rebuild their lives and sort of create this, what for some, a lucky few, unfortunately, would be this generational wealth. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about like how you felt like your background as a journalist, as a professor, and especially as a screenwriter, because so mm-hmm. much of the book is so cinematic, especially from the very first page, which I'm so totally obsessed with, and I can't help myself. But like, you know, you have this really wonderful scene where your mom is like on the phone. There's a crystal, you know, chandelier above her head, and you can just see little Bridgett, like watching her, overhearing this conversation, and then, you know, the interaction with your teacher about your shoes. Anyway, so I wondered if you could talk about how being a journalist and a screenwriter and all of the different parts of you mm-hmm. kind of came together to help you tell this story.
Yeah, I am convinced that I couldn't tell this story sooner. I believe this was the perfect time for me to tell it, and there are a lot of reasons for that, but a personal reason is, honestly, I felt I had to hone my craft mm-hmm. enough to be ready to tell the story the way I wanted it to be told. And that required, in my case, it really required sort of learning all these genres of writing mm-hmm. and getting confident in each. Mm-hmm. Because I used all those skills, let me tell you. I used my training as a journalist to write this book, but I really also used my training as having written 2 novels. Mm-hmm. So my training as a novelist came into play as well. Mm-hmm. And yes, my experience as a screenwriter.
Yes.
All helped me to sort of be able to tell the story the way I wanted to tell it, because it's not just a straightforward memoir. It has social history, mm-hmm. but I wanted it to be a page turner, if you know, in an ideal world. And I also wanted people to learn something from it, to sort of learn about a history and a world they had no idea about until they pick up the book and started mm-hmm. reading it. So that was a big order. Mm-hmm. And I wanted them to learn about my mother. So.
And what did you learn? What did you learn writing the book?
I learned so much.
Really?
Yeah.
What are the things that surprised you that you learned?
So many, I'll name a couple. So in terms of the numbers, I had no idea that numbers men, mostly men, used a lot of their largesse to invest in the black community. You forget about segregation and you forget about discrimination. Blacks couldn't even go to a downtown hotel to stay overnight.
Right.
I mean, they had so few amenities available to them that numbers men would invest in businesses, legitimate businesses mm-hmm. that provided services mm-hmm. to black folks. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't understood their role as philanthropists in the community. It was incredible to me. And my favorite example is that the NAACP was fledgling in Detroit until numbers men infused it with cash. Mm. The same for the National Urban League. Mm. Now that's vital because those were some of the biggest chapters of those organizations in the country were in Detroit, and they became pivotal during the civil rights movement. Mm-hmm. So you see how that connection plays out. It's incredible to me. And yet I saw it on a smaller scale. I saw my mother doing a lot for the community and being very generous and giving people, you know, coming to their aid, et cetera. But then I came to understand in researching the book that this was part of the numbers runners tradition.
Right.
Like that was part of what you did. You were a race man or a race woman.
Right.
Right, that came with it.
Right.
So that was pretty beautiful and powerful for me to learn.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah, because I think whenever you talk about Black people, especially like in popular culture representations of Black people, especially I think Black women who have I think it was one of your relatives who called Fanny Sedity.
Her sister.
Yes. So I think there's this notion that if you like nice things, that she definitely did,
Yes.
then you're sort of materialistic and a little selfish, right? Which is sort of like not how you're supposed to be in the Black community.
Right.
But generally, I think women are like definitely penalized for it. So I love this. Again, this reframing of how a Black woman can have pride in the things that she works hard to attain, to take care of her family, and by any means necessary, which is what white male patriarchs do all the time, and we give them tons of credit for, but not really Black women. And then also this idea that like she can love nice things and have them and flaunt them as she does, and kind of pass that along to you and your family, but also not have that be the only facet of her personality.
Right. That was one facet. And I think about this, you know, she was so beloved and admired. People adored her. They sort of like gathered around her all the time. They wanted to be in her presence. And I think the reason she was able to avoid sort of being judged a lot is because she was so generous.
Yeah.
And because people saw that she was working hard for what she had, as you said.
Right.
You know, they saw that no one gave it to her.
Right.
And she had this way about her. She loved to see people do well.
Yeah.
And you could feel it. You know, she wanted to help, and she also wanted to help celebrate if you were doing well.
Right.
Like, she just thought we should all do well. Like, I'm living well, and you should too.
Yes.
You know, that was her attitude about
Yes.
it. It wasn't like she thought this is just for me.
Right.
She wasn't competitive.
Right.
You know, it wasn't about keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah.
It was none of that. It was just like, we're entitled to this, people.
Right.
We, you know, was it James Baldwin who said your crown's been paid for?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes.
wear it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No, she definitely has that spirit. In fact, I was looking at the book again last night and thinking about like one really tender moment that, you know, I won't ruin the book for other people. You have to go buy it. That's what this is about, partially. But, you know, there's a part where you talk about basically like missing her.
Yeah.
And the fact that even though you were, I guess, taking off in your career in one way, that you had like lost having someone to make proud.
Absolutely.
And you like kind of lost your identity as hers.
Yes.
And that was just like so profound and like such a beautiful way, and a beautiful and succinct way, you know, for those of us who have lost our mothers, you know, to try to capture the grief and like the depth of it. When you have a matriarch or a mother figure who is so has such a large presence,
Yeah.
you know, because I mean, she really, dazzling is not a word that I use a lot, but like, she is incredibly like dazzling and fierce, and she's just like a badass superhero. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
you know, and like not in like the superwoman, you know, sort of like kind of cage. I think that that Black womanhood is framed in, but like in this way that is just like, reading about her makes you feel like I can do anything. I can have 12 pairs of shoes. You know, I'm just like gonna make all the haters gather around. It's gonna be fantastic. And
she would love that.
Yeah.
She would love that.
Yeah.
That she's inspiring other women, you know, to just live their best lives within the means that they have, you know.
Exactly.
And that was her whole thing. Take what you have and do everything you can with it.
Right.
You know?
Yes,
So-
that brings me back to this point about like the black bourgeoisie, the Black working class bourgeoisie, I think is how you put it. And like just sort of their absence in our conversation right now.
Yes.
So we almost never talk about the Black working class or the Black middle class anymore. But it feels like you're very much a part. You're in these worlds. You write about these worlds really well. And I wondered if you could talk about like the entrepreneurial spirit that your mom passed on to you, like and other gifts of her hustle, basically that you
someone
inherited.
said she humanizes the hustle, and I was like, I love that.
That's
because that is
perfect.
true, right? Because there's a lot of connotations around that word hustle.
Yes.
But my aunt, that was one of the first things she said. This was her sister. She adored her like you wouldn't believe. And she said, Fanny always was a hustler. That's how she put it. She said when she wanted something, she just didn't stop. And that's really admirable.
Yes.
Right? It's admirable. I think in some ways I'm not like her because I don't have that desire to start my own business. Right? I thought, no, I want to be a writer. Maybe that's easier. But the truth is, I am entrepreneurial. I am. And I realized it and had to admit it to myself when I decided, kind of out of nowhere, like, I feel like I want to see a certain kind of film out in the world. And if I don't see it, maybe I should make it. I know film takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of skill. It's no easy thing to direct and write and produce a film. But if I hadn't had the mother I had, I think I would have thought it was impossible. But I'd never thought it was impossible. I thought, sure, I can do this. It was only later I realized it's because you lived with that woman for so many years and you watched her daily do the impossible and make it look easy.
And so you knew that you were capable of doing anything.
Like, I can do this.
That's incredible. It's such a gift. It's many gifts.
It's a gift. It's one of many.
One of many gifts that she bestowed upon you. And now we get to receive and participate in them, which is just even better. So there are some questions from our Bookstr audience, so thank you for writing those and sending them in. Becky asks, do you plan on writing any more nonfiction books about strong women?
That's a great question, Becky. Thank you for asking it. I will say this, I really love this nonfiction form.
Really?
It took me a while to get around to writing a nonfiction book, but I love it. And I realize it's because I love the research. I love bringing a life to life, in words. And so I'm going to say it's highly likely that it'll happen again.
Okay.
Yeah.
But do you think you'd write something about yourself, or remains to be seen?
Remains to be seen. I think
right.
there's so many interesting women out there whose stories need to be told. So, I think it'll be maybe not me.
All right. Okay. Well, let me know if you need a biographer, because I'll do it. Christy writes, as a professor and mentor, what do you think is the most important lesson you teach to your students?
That's another good question. Thank you. Yeah. I love teaching, by the way, and I teach creative writing. That's what I do. Yeah. I teach at CUNY. I love those students so much.
Shout out to CUNY students.
Shout out to CUNY students. Baruch College. Yay.
Woo!
I try to really encourage them to give themselves permission to discover their voices. And I really try to remind them that won't happen right away necessarily, but you're entitled to explore your own voice and know that it's yours. That's the one thing you bring to all of this that's unique. That's what you have going for you, your voice. And it's no small thing. I mean, I feel like it took me years and years and years to find my voice. But it's really because I think some of us, sometimes as women, sometimes as people of color, are not really encouraged to put themselves on the page or put themselves out there in a way that others just naturally do. So I spend a lot of time encouraging people to just trust their own voice.
Yes.
It sounds simple, but to me it's the bedrock of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's also connected to your mother, right?
Yeah,
in a way
absolutely.
Because she so encourages you when you see a symbol like that, like you see a life like that where there's a quote, and I'm not going to get it right now because, of course, I'm on Facebook Live, but it's about by someone like showing up and like being their full selves, they give you permission to do the same.
That's very true. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah,
because it's what you see is what you mirror.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's so valuable because if you haven't seen it, then how can you mirror it, right?
Exactly. That's true.
Lynn asks, what made you want to write a movie, and what was the inspiration behind Naked Acts?
Oh, Naked Acts is like my first child. That's what I call Naked Acts.
Right.
Yeah, really, because I worried over that project like it was a baby. I started, I think, out of arrogance, really. I think that's the word. Because I just couldn't believe these depictions of black women in film.
Okay.
I kept saying, can I see one that I recognize?
Yeah.
Could I see someone like my friends?
Yeah.
Like people I know?
Right.
And at the time, I'm part of Spike Lee's generation.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of talk about Spike Lee's depiction of women. It was a little lacking.
Yes.
And he said in some interview, well, if you don't like my depictions of women, make your own films. And I thought, okay.
All right, Spike.
All right.
Do it.
Good point, Spike. Yeah, good point. So that's really what prompted the whole process.
Great.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how long was the process? Give or take.
Actually, I wrote about 14 drafts of my script.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm a rewriter.
Yes.
I'm a rewriter.
Yes.
And I'd say from beginning to end, it was 3 years, and people tell me that's quick.
Yeah.
From I'm going to do this idea to actually watching my film being screened at a film festival in Africa.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
It's huge. Sasha says you're a co-founder of Words at Weeksville.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Yeah, so Weeksville, for those who may not know, is an incredible cultural center that sits on the site of one of the first free black communities in the country. It's right in Crown Heights, Brooklyn.
Brooklyn.
Yes, and it still has, I think, 3 of its original houses on the site.
Wow.
Yeah, people didn't know this history, that black folks actually in the 19th century had a community, a thriving community of over 500 people living there.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. So my husband is now the executive director? Yeah, executive director of Weeksville. And sorry about that, Rob.
That's okay.
You're like, really? That's when you messed up? And so when he's only been there a little over a year.
Okay.
And he and I have been sort of doing these sort of literary salons and reading series for years.
Oh, great.
And it seemed like a natural thing to bring it to Weeksville, to bring these readings to Weeksville. So we decided to call it Words of Weeksville.
Great.
And it's about to have its 2nd anniversary. Wow. Yeah. Well, my reading will be at Weeksville, my Brooklyn launch, and that will kick off our 2nd year.
Yes.
Yeah.
So exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Is it Weeksville Heritage Center?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. That's so exciting. Okay. Nathaniel asks, are you going to write another movie?
Nathaniel, that's like the $1 million question. It's hard to believe this, but that film is 20 years old.
Wow.
I know. We just had a 20th anniversary screening.
1999?
Yeah, 98.
98, okay.
Was when it sort of, had its theatrical release. And still, I get that question all the time.
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like
people want more from you.
I know, it's so beautiful to think,
Yes.
like, I say to people, I made a film, and folks will say, no, Bridgett, you're a filmmaker.
Right.
I'm like, but I made a film. They're like, that's all it takes.
Yeah, just take one.
It just takes one.
Yeah.
So I get that question often, and I usually say, no, I'm into writing books now. But lately, I don't know what has happened.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely like a need for, they call it content, which is a word I don't like very much, but I mean, it's a good shorthand, so we'll go with it. Yeah. But there's just a need for this this material and these stories told in the visual realm. So
yeah, it's a new moment.
That's what it is.
So lately, I've been thinking maybe.
Okay, stay tuned, you guys. That may be coming.
Maybe.
Tiffany asks, what is your writing process like? How does writing books, screenplays, or articles differ? It's a great question.
That is a great question. And they are different because they're each different genres, you know. I would say writing a novel is really more about trying to create a world around an idea.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's
and making it
description.
feel real. People want to read a novel and feel that they've been dropped into a real world.
Yes.
And that is really where all the craft lies. You know, it's so difficult to pull off.
Yeah.
But it's exciting. I think that's the impetus. If you have this idea, you really want to give it sort of life and characters and sort of a tangibility, then a novel's a thing to do,
Yes.
you know, to create that. For a screenplay, you know, screenplays are all visual, and they're all structural, and they're all about telling a visual story. And yeah, I think that it's important to think about that. I often ask myself, what genre should this idea be in based on how it should be perceived. And some stories to me require the big screen. They require a visual storytelling. Not just in the language of what you're writing, but in the fact that you're going to sort of see this played out. And some stories lend themselves to that more, I think.
Right.
So a lot of the writing process for me is figuring out early on, what genre does this need to be? What am I trying to say?
You, how do you do that? Like,
Yeah.
Do you just like let the idea marinate a little bit and then like eventually it becomes clear like, oh, this needs to be a screenplay? Or do you like do a draft and then it becomes clear, or how does that?
In my
depends.
experience, I kind of know going in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not sure what's happened in my sort of thought processes that brings me to that, but I tend to think of something in the genre that I end up writing it in.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's probably just experience.
I don't know, maybe. They say too that, you know, write the book you want to read.
Yeah.
Write the film you want to see.
Right.
And I think that's what happens with me. I'm like, I would like to read that.
Yes.
So, I guess I better write it.
Yes. Okay. Yes, exactly. Let's put a, you know. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So Janie says, wow, I've never heard of this. Really glad this popped up on my feed. Bookstr, thank you. Jeff says, you're a screenwriter, professor, novelist. What's your favorite thing about each of your careers?
Oh, I haven't. Yeah, that's so lovely to think of them as separate careers.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so it's kind of like streamlined, right? All under the umbrella of Bridgett.
If only it had been that neat.
Right. Yes.
I love teaching, and I think that's because it means a lot to me to have impact in someone's life, and to be the kind of teacher I always wanted to have. Like, that's what I go in the room with every time I'm teaching. Right? And so the other beauty of teaching is you get immediate feedback very often, and you can see the difference you're making. And that's really gratifying. It's very gratifying.
It's nice to get feedback most of the time in real time.
In real time, you know. Sometimes you don't hear it for years.
Yes.
That's okay, though.
Yes.
And writing is just writing, isn't it? It's beautiful. That's that opportunity to be sort of with myself in a way that's different from anything else. That creative process really is just that opportunity to literally, I think about it as communing with myself. And only writing does that for me. Filmmaking is beautiful because it is collaborative, and I love that too. I'm a social creature when I'm not, until I'm not. You know? I'm a social creature until I'm not.
Until you have to write. And then you have to
then
go
you can't
into
be.
the introvert, you know, writer corner and like create the work.
Yeah.
And so, let's see. Leandra says, what advice would you give a young African-American female who's working hard and going to school to achieve my goals, especially with financial downfalls?
Yeah, it's tough.
It's tough.
You know, my mom is an example of someone who really just kept trying, you know, and who faced adversity. When my mom migrated to Detroit, she faced poverty for the first time. She wasn't familiar with that at all. She had a solid working class background in her hometown of Nashville, and then she migrated north, and suddenly life wasn't what she had anticipated, and there she was struggling. And that's when she figured out how to find a way to make it work for herself. You know, she did make a way out of no way. And so I like to remind people, because she's an example of this, that there's always a way to move toward your goal. And if you move away from this idea that it has to be in a certain timeline or it has to happen a certain way, then I feel as though you give yourself permission to succeed on your own terms in the ways you need to. Yeah, we're so hard on ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know, and society doesn't help with that.
No.
This idea that there's overnight successes and everyone wants to be, you know, Instagram famous, and all these things that are pulling at people that take us away from the journey, you know. My mom used to say, you take one step, God takes two.
Yes.
Just keep moving.
Right.
Moving in that direction. She would give advice a lot to people who would come by, you know, and they'd ask for her counsel. And, you know, I remember this young woman, a friend of the family, saying, oh, Miss Davis, I really would like to go back to school, but I feel so old. And it's going to take years. And my mom said, well, tell me this. If you don't go back to school, how old will you be? Same age.
Right.
So you might as well do it.
Yeah.
You might as well do it.
Yeah.
You know, you're not going to stop the aging process. So it's not about how old you'll be when you do something. It's about whether when you get to a certain age, you've done the thing you wanted to do.
Right.
Yeah, so I try to remember that. And I try to share that with people when they're in the midst of their struggle and they're balancing so much and trying to finish school, trying to deal with their financial challenges. The thing is, if it takes you 10, 12, 15 years, just keep working on it. Yeah. I teach those kind of students at CUNY, by the way.
Right.
Some of them are, you know, I've taught students older than me. Because when they were able to do it, they went back.
Yes.
It doesn't change your pride, the value of it, what it means to you. It doesn't matter when it happens, as long as you stay focused and you eventually get that goal achieved. Yeah, I really believe in that.
Yeah, I think that's so valuable. I mean, I think also people generally will get discouraged because you're right, they hold on to this idea of what their life should be and they're comparing themselves to other people. And I love this quote that, like, you have to let go of the life that you planned in order to have the life that's meant for you. And I think that that's so valuable. It's hard when you're struggling and you're really trying to make life happen, especially at an increasingly frenetic pace.
Yes.
But sometimes you just need to let go of trying to make things happen so aggressively the way that you think they should happen and allow your life to unfold. Layani Jones says, you're the author of Shifting into Neutral. Wow, at 4 exclamation points.
Sweet.
I'm so excited. I just want to say that I love that book and I'm thrilled to know that you're still writing. Have you considered adapting it for film?
Oh, that's so lovely. So my very first novel was a coming-of-age book called Shifting Through Neutral, and it was set in Detroit, and it's really a father-daughter relationship based on my own relationship with my dad.
Yes.
And I love that, the way you love your first anything.
Right.
You know, it really is. It has a special place in my heart. And I was told with that novel that it, too, seemed pretty cinematic. I guess I can't help myself.
You can't.
That's how I write.
It's one of your gifts.
That's how I write.
One of your many gifts.
So who knows? Yeah, I would love to see it adapted. I would.
Okay. So for all you Bookstr folks who listened to Bridgett talk about Weeksville Heritage Center, you should know that the website is in the comments, so you can check there for the link.
That's great.
Has the full title, all that. Please check it out. Leandra has one more question, actually a couple. With the new generation of women in the industry, especially women of color, bringing new material and even getting recognized with shows like Insecure, movies like Black Panther, the upcoming movie Big, and other popular mainstream outlets, what are you excited to see with the new incoming wave? And what advice would you give so more women can share their stories so that the stereotypes about Black women can be further broken down?
Yeah, another very good question.
Yeah.
I think it's two parts, right?
Yeah.
I think first, I would say that what's exciting to me is I can see happening what I always wanted when I set out to make my own little film. I remember telling people, I just want to explore the internal life of a Black woman. Like, that seems so basic, but it's radical. Their interior lives. How often do we see that? And so Insecure for me is great because it's really about what's going on with her. It's about her interior life. And so I would really encourage young Black women who are writing their own content, there's that word, creating their own content, to really, really, you know, ideally have that as a goal. How can I create these characters and reveal an interior life, right?
Yes.
And then the other thing I would just say is grab those means of production. It's amazing to me now what you couldn't do 20 years ago when I made my film. My film was expensive compared to what you could do today.
Right.
Because now you have all these ways to make content, to actually, for instance, create web series. If I was, you know, starting out now in visual media, I would totally have a web series.
Yes.
I would totally do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there are all these programs, you know, for the diversity access fellowships and workshops and stuff like that.
And Ava DuVernay is so doing her part to keep,
with Array.
Yes, to keep more opportunities out there, you know. So, yeah, I think it's actually an exciting time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. It definitely is. So unfortunately, all great things must come to an end.
So quick.
I know. Time just flies and flew with me talking to you. Tell us where we can find your book. Where can we find you online, and where can we see you, bookstores and venues?
Yes. Well, yes. Let me see. You can go to my website, BridgettDavis.com, and it has my entire tour schedule on it. It also has ways for you to purchase the book. The book's available all the places books are sold.
Yes,
so,
excellent.
A little shout out for independent bookstores.
Yes.
I always love when people buy books at indie bookstores, so I'd encourage that.
Yes.
And I'm on all that social media. You can
All
find me
that.
on Facebook,
Okay.
Bridgett Davis,
Yes.
and Twitter. I don't know my Twitter handle.
That's
I think it's
okay.
something like @BridgettM. Does that sound right?
You're famous, so you can find her on Facebook. That's all you need to know.
Definitely.
Yes, absolutely. Wonderful. Well, such a pleasure having you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yes.
And thank you for that Kirkus reviews. Can you just show that one?
Oh, I will show it one more
This
time.
is
I'm so
all-
proud of it in this fabulous
Oh,
photo of you.
doing that. Beautiful, beautiful work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for tuning in. See you next time.